The Door-to-Door Wig Salesman by Shawn Langhans. Unlike the soldiers driving past him, who were always glaring with their bandaged heads hidden under their plastic-steel helmets, John Jeremy was always smiling, even as he walked through the mostly abandoned residential street. Unlike the civilians, John opted out of artificial hair, instead choosing to show off his scarred head in hopes of easing in his future patients. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. At this hour, civilians, however, were not allowed to walk the streets. Martial law had been in effect now for a few years longer than anyone expected, but that was neither here nor there. Anybody could have signed up for his job, or that of a soldier, at the beginning of this parasitic spread. His attire was somewhere between a door-to-door salesman and a surgeon, which was well enough because that wasn't far off from what he was doing. He wore a smart dark brown suit over an identical colored shirt and tie, though they were hardly visible under the semi-see-through opaque plastic apron that had a reflective material woven within. To his potential patients, or volunteers as he was encouraged to call them, his wardrobe gave him the appearance of a friendly neighbor, an old friend, some chum from school back when schools were still around. The brown sport suit under the apron was only brown to hide dried blood, and the military-issued apron was made so blood could be quickly, ideally, sprayed off before it dried. Of course, he never told his patients this, his volunteers rather. No, if asked why he looked like a traveling encyclopedia salesman from a century before, he'd make some joke to quell their fears while he prepared the tranks. About his outfit, about his pink bald head, about their volunteer bonus, whatever he could say to get them to laugh and let him in, to get them skinned and tagged. Truth was, he was the last attempt at getting a household deloused. After him came the soldiers, and with them came death. And so far, it wasn't looking good for the first house on his route today. Before him was a old Victorian with the modern fixings added as an afterthought. Useless solar panels atop a 200-year-old home only seemed that much more ramshackle with every opening on the first floor poorly boarded shut. John frowned at the sight of the three messages hastily painted on the plywood that prevented him from entering the abode. The first one was clearly directed at any troublesome thieves. "Looters will be shot dead." The second aimed at the soldiers. "Just leave us be. Children inside." And the final obviously intended for John Jeremy himself. "We don't want your blood money, scalpers. Be gone." John hid his sadness as he clicked a small checkbox on his tiny tablet that read, "Non-compliant. Final attempt," before he placed the tablet back in his tiny bulletproof briefcase before moving on to the next house. Before leaving, he saw the little girl or boy hidden beyond the boarded-up window, but he knew there was nothing he could do for the child. His or her parents had already made that decision. Instead of dwelling on it, he moseyed up to the next home, and before he even made it up to the steps, the door ahead was already opening. A nervous woman wearing a mask and taut plastic wrapped around her infected scalp revealed herself. Behind her were two children, each in different states of disrepair. It didn't take long to realize that these three souls were already dead, but that wasn't his call to make. That was between them and their God. John Jeremy did as he was trained. He started with the joke. "Is it just me, or are you glowing right now?" "Glowing?" asked the woman, whose voice was clearly already stage 3. Even if she survived the procedure, the parasite had won. It was clearly already in her brain and working its way down her gullet. Regardless, he switched on his customer service persona and continued his ruse. "Yeah, you look like you're about to feel like $1 billion, especially after we finally pluck out that sick little worm from you and pay you your volunteer bonus. Do you mind if I come in?" The lady shielded her two children, who both seemed more interested than afraid of John. How many strangers had these children seen? He tried to imagine how long they'd probably spent in isolated quarantine, but he quickly realized that didn't matter. They would soon be taken to an orphanage. This lady had waited too long. Yet still, she tried to place blame on government-issued John here. "I'm sorry, I'm ready to volunteer, but do you mind covering your head? My husband, before he told Maggie and Michelle that they'd never had to get the all cut." "Oh, and I'm sure he had some choice words instead of all cut. Your name, just for my records, is Marilyn Dunn, husband of William Dunn." The sickly woman started to explain. "Yeah, but he, before trailing off. "You need not say more, Marilyn. If you don't mind, will you take Maggie and Michelle inside while I finish preparing the forms? I'll throw on a wig, as well." The lady smiled with her eyes as her mouth was hidden behind the latex mask that hid her mouth and nose. As she turned around and guided her children inside and into another room, John saw the black veins peeking through the edges of the mask. She didn't have long. It was a shame that she would have to go through with the procedure just to die a few hours later. But this was her choice. Worse yet, he already knew the superlouse in her brain would likely have damaged her opioid receptors beyond repair, essentially rendering all anesthetics useless. He dared not show his concern. Instead, he opened his briefcase once again and plucked out from it a small vac-sealed bag. John tore open the small package and shook the neon green wig out and placed it upon his scarred scalp. He personally hated how the itchy synth hair felt atop his sensitive scalp, but if it amused these children before he maimed them, then that was fine. John Jeremy wondered how many children probably hated him instead of their parents, though he never lost sleep over it. Maybe today that wouldn't be the case. Immediately he noticed the stench of death inside. He didn't see the husband, but judging from the small wife's frame, she couldn't have dragged the body far, even with the help of her 2 children. The former head of house was probably rotting in the basement, all because he had refused the procedure a year ago when it had a 99.5 efficacy rating. Hell, had the family volunteered themselves 4 months ago, he'd easily still be alive. But no, the anti-procedures, as the remaining media outlets had to call them, had chosen to write off the parasitic louse as another false flag, deep state hoax that led them to their own demise. Alas, neither here nor there. This woman had come to her senses enough to open the door to John Jeremy. Sometimes, even this late in the infection, most people still needed to be convinced to volunteer. Or worse, they'd simply chose to shoot at him as he walked up the steps. Of course, they didn't know his brown suit and apron were both bulletproof, but how could they? And those who chose that course were typically met with return fire from the soldiers down the road. "Look, Mommy, a clown," said one of the 2 girls. John tried to not let his eyes rest on the black pulsating vein, no thicker than embroidery thread on the young girl's throat. Instead, he made a joke. "I'm no clown, young lady. I'm here to give you lots of money. But I guess that sure makes me a clown then, huh?" he exclaimed before gesturing with pointer finger and thumb over his nose, honking it as if it were a bicycle horn. "But first I have to talk to Mommy real quick. How about you 2 go play upstairs?" "I don't wanna. It's smelly up there," said the other little girl. No black thread in her neck, he noticed. "No, don't go upstairs. Go play in your fort for a little bit while Mommy talks to the doctor." "First I'm a clown and now I'm a doctor? What a fun time to be alive," John said, honking his imaginary clown nose once more. "No, Miss Dunn. I'm here to make the sickness go away and give you and your little girls your much-deserved bonus before I carry on and help your neighbors get better, too." But the girls didn't hear him. They were already gone, doing whatever it is little girls do in a house cursed. The mother explained that their father was upstairs. Then she also explained that he shouldn't bother with the neighbors. They had all shot themselves yesterday. Once again, John Jeremy tried to brighten the mood by explaining the procedure in a light-hearted fashion. He felt distant as he spoke. "After I trank you, you'll sleep and feel nothing, honey. And I will quickly remove the flap of skin between your eyes up, and over your cranium, and back down to the base of your skull." Morbid, yet somehow it still sounded pleasant and sweet. John had practiced this conversation enough times in the mirror that it was now second nature. "And then I will apply the plasma that kills the parasite and their eggs. But I'm sure you know the side effects to that," he said as he quickly lifted his wig, revealing the scarred dome once more. She grimaced. Once more the clown turned the sour mood into a joke. "But you'll be paid handsomely enough that you and your children won't have to look like little old me." Defeated, she offered her thumbprint as a signature. "I've heard it was a quick procedure, painless even." He lied. "Of course. The shot will put you right to sleep, and in 10 minutes you'll slowly find yourself fading back into reality. There will be some discomfort, but if you follow the directions on your post-louse procedure kit, you'll be fine. Maybe take a few neoprofen tablets if you need them. But I didn't. Most don't. Anyways, when you wake up, I'll have finished your delousing procedure and your children's procedure as well." "And my check? What about my check?" "Of course, the check will be automatically deposited into your primary account, which will be accessible as early as tomorrow morning." Defeated, she sighed and laid down on the floor of what might have been a kitchen at one point. Now it looked closer akin to a landfill. Not the most hygienic work environment, but for John's volunteers that didn't matter much. "Are you ready?" he asked. She nodded, and before she could protest, the needle in her arm pushed into her a potion that quickly put her to sleep. The sleeping woman didn't cry out as he drugged the scalpel across the base of her hairline and around her ears, nor did she scream as he dug his gloved fingers under the infected dermis above her brow. No, it was one of the two little girls who screamed instead. But it was too late in the procedure to stop and comfort the child, so instead he continued his work. Having done this thousands of times by now, it was second nature, and the whole task only took 2 or 3 minutes and 4 or 5 motions. Cut, 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 finger, pull, slice. Then he applied the antibiotic gel over the bloody skull and placed the infected scalp in between 2 pieces of plastic like some kind of bookmark made of flesh. Quickly the gel hardened and became a solidified shell where her hair had once been. John pressed a button on the back of his tablet that read voluntarily compliant and another that read volunteer bonus initiated, which placed the promised funds in her account. Next, he'd have to see about those traumatized kids and hope they weren't too hard to find. He'd have to get their scalps too if this house was to be fully cleared, and he still had a lot of other houses on the block to visit, assuming there were still survivors left to save. The end.